And now I'm going to hit the start webinar button, which will let people in. So we'll give them a couple of moments to just queue up inside. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Welcome to the webinar. We're letting the attendees kind of queue up inside and we'll get started in just a moment. So thank you for joining us. We still have a few people tuning in or just getting settled in, so we'll give it another moment and we'll get started. Okay, Jen, I think it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gunnar. Hello, and welcome to our webinar on evidence-based design, what, why, and how. My name is Jennifer Zumbrun. At Ole Creative, we've been providing biophilic printed products for over 10 years with our decorative and privacy window films, panels, artwork, and wall solutions. Because this is a certification course, please stick with us until the end so we can give you details on how to get credit. We are very pleased to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. They are recognized experts in the field of evidence-based design, and we are excited to learn from them today. Tiana Lemons and Jennifer Wilcynski are senior interior designers with Orcutt Winslow, and Lynn, Kenney, and Randy Carter join us from the Center for Health Design. Karen Barnett is president and CEO of Ole Creative and will be monitoring the Q&A. And production of this webinar is made possible by Gunnar Hood. Gunnar is with WSI Marketing and has been helping Ole Creative with our marketing efforts for over 3 years. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Gunnar so he can share some technical details and tell us how the Q&A portion of the webinar will work. Gunnar?
Hey, thanks so much, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. Just real quickly, a couple of housekeeping items. One, hopefully everybody can hear us loud and clear. All lines are muted for this. And we do want to encourage you, if you have questions, submit them as you think about them throughout the presentation. We use the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen. On the right-hand side, you see the bottom of it if you're tuning in by phone. And on the next screen, I'll show you where it is on the desktop as well. If you do happen to experience any challenges with audio on your end during the presentation, we recommend switching away from the computer audio, going to the phone audio and back real quick to see if that resolves it. If not, you should have a phone number that you can use to actually dial in. And sometimes people just disconnect and reconnect and everything works out fine. So real quick about the Q&A feature, you'll see that located on the bottom of your screen over on the right-hand side. And one of the cool features about it is that once you submit a question, everybody else in the room can see it. And if others have the same question, go, hey, that was on my mind too, just hit the thumbs up button. And that helps move questions to the top of the queue so that we can prioritize which ones get answered during the session. So we hope you enjoy the webinar. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Lynn Kenney with the Center for Health Design.
Thank you, Gunnar. All right. Hi, everyone. Well, we're so excited to be here today. And I just want to say thank you for joining us. And also thank you to the folks at Ole for hosting us all. And it really is our hope that by the end of this webinar, you're all going to feel really excited and much more comfortable, both understanding the evidence-based design process and applying it to your everyday projects and products, so that together we can influence change in the industry to improve outcomes and to improve return on investment. So let's go to the next slide. I'm hoping that everybody on the call is familiar with the Center for Health Design, but just a quick note about the center. I've been with the center now for 5 years. It's gone by very quickly. And it is truly an honor to work with everyone at the Center for Health Design. I'm so proud of the work that they do. They are a 501c3, and it is their mission to transform healthcare environments as well as other environments. We're increasingly seeing people apply the EBD process to environments outside of healthcare. But the goal is to create a healthier, safer world. And we do that by providing research, education, and advocacy. And we're going to give you some very specific examples here today. So let's begin with an overview of evidence-based design. Next slide. So when I got my Edac certification, when I began with the center 5 years ago, I was excited to get it, but I had no idea of the history of evidence-based design. So I thought, it lends a lot of credence, and it's kind of exciting to know that you can actually trace the roots of evidence-based design back to the days of the ancient Greece civilizations. And so we see from the history books that actually the decision to orient rooms toward the sun was actually done in the hospitals back in ancient Greek times. So it was not evidence-based, it was intuitive. And I guess what I would say about that is evidence-based design sounds so official, but I bet that there are things that you're all doing in your practice right now where you're evaluating, credible research. And so that is actually the most important step of evidence-based design. So you're already doing it to some extent. We'll go to the next slide. So as we see the actual evolution of evidence-based design, what we find is that it's actually based on the same principles as evidence-based medicine. So here you're seeing that there was a 50-year evolution. And this began with the medical profession really understanding and recognizing that by taking all of the clinical trials and combining that data and that research, they could have better patient outcomes in the medical environment, the clinical environment. And so you see that in the work by Sackett and Gunnett, and then again by Archie Cochran's book in 1972. Then in the 1980s, we had the Sentinel Study for Evidence-Based Design, which was done by Roger Ulrich, which I imagine many of you are familiar with that study. But basically, it took two groups of patients, one group after a minor surgery, one group of patients looking at a view of a brick wall, another group of patients looking at a view of nature. And lo and behold, the patients looking at the view of nature experienced less pain medication, they had shorter length of stay, and had fewer negative comments. And that's so significant for all of us, right? Because we know that means that we're increasing HCAP scores, and we're increasing reimbursement, but most importantly, we're increasing the experience for a healing environment for patients. So it's really exciting to see how that has evolved since that time. Back in the when that Roger Ulrich study first came out, that was it. There were no other evidence, EBD studies or research studies around the design elements. And today, as you'll see when we show you an example of what we have in the knowledge repository, we have well over 5,000 research citations. So it's grown quite a bit. There's still a lot of room for research to be done as well. And so based on that, the center championed the evidence-based design process. We had a grant to help us do this from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and also partnered with Steelcase Health to help us develop the Edac certification and testing. So we can go to the next. And again, remembering that it's based on the concepts of evidence-based medicine. So here's our definition of evidence-based design. And I think what's really important, the really important components of this definition is that it's a process. Evidence-based design is a process. And I'm actually going to take you through, there are 8 steps, and I'll describe that to you. And then Randy and Tiana and Jennifer will actually bring some examples to life to help you see how that process gets applied. But it's a process about, you could go back just one slide if you don't mind, Gunnar, thank you. A process of basing decisions about the built environment on credible research to achieve the best possible outcomes and also to improve return on investment. Now we can go to the next. Okay, so here are the 8 steps. So we begin with organizational readiness. One of the things that I think is really exciting about evidence-based design is that as you become knowledgeable, and this becomes your framework for the either product design or physical environment design, when you're knowledgeable and can speak to this process, it really gives you a framework to help you justify return on investment and help you justify to be one of those major stakeholders that we advocate should be at the organizational readiness, early stage of the pre-design process. And of course, that's one of the things the Center for Health Design advocates for, having all the major stakeholders there early in the process so that you can have the best possible outcomes. So the first step is to establish a vision that defines the intentions, direction, goals, and objectives for the project. And then the next one is in the pre-design phase, where you're really, and this is one of the things that the Edac certification helps you do. How do you identify and find the credible research and literature in the industry? How do you identify the gaps in knowledge so that you can, apply that to the intended outcomes that you're looking to have? And then in the next, and this is what the process teaches you to do, how do you then critically interpret that research and evidence to determine if it is credible and it can be used to inform the design and the hypothesis. And then in the next. And then the next step is translating that evidence into design guidelines, creating summary statements that designers can use to guide the aesthetic, functional, or compositional decisions. But I also like to add that this certainly applies to product design as well and can help inform product decisions. Next, you develop a hypothesis. And then, it doesn't have to be a complicated hypothesis. It can be, if I give patients a view of nature, which I know Ole does some really great work. I saw in your last newsletter where you're putting films over windows that instead of having a view of the cooling towers at the hospital, you've got this beautiful meadow view. I mean, that's like so cool and I love it. So the hypothesis can be, if patients have a view of nature, then they're going to have a shorter length of stay and less perceived pain. And then in the next step, you're collecting. So at this part of the process, you assess the current processes at a macro level and define project metrics. And then in the next step for construction, this is where it's the responsibility for the project team to ensure that all design strategies that were determined early in the process are executed as specified in the design documents. And then finally, we have occupancy. And so this is where we hope that the research team can implement their research study as outlined by their plan. They can track changes and make necessary adjustments. I would also say, and we know that the data collection obviously is the most challenging and time-consuming part of the research project, but it's also the most important because that's where we're collecting and sharing as an industry, and we can make positive changes moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Next slide. So just a quick mention that process, it can be applied very formally by a PhD researcher. It can be applied very casually by someone who's just starting out, and really starting to understand and recognize the benefits of applying and understanding evidence-based design. And the center does have the Edac certification, which we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary actually. And that Edac certification really helps you to better understand and apply the process. Next slide. So the majority of Edac certification holders are in the US, but we have all these pioneers across the world. You can see them listed here. And so we're really excited that the recognition and the certification program continues to grow, and it's very well recognized in the industry. Next slide. And then this is just giving you an example of advocate firm. So an advocate firm is a firm who dedicates 25% of their healthcare team to getting Edac certified. And you can see that we have some of the big, huge architectural firms and smaller firms, as well as solution providers. So it's very doable and very well recognized. And next slide. And so why EBD? I think, we've started to address that. The business case is a big deal, obviously. ROI is always going to come into the picture, as well as improving outcomes. So how do you balance that and achieve both, ROI as well as improving outcomes? So now I'm going to turn it over to Randy Carter, and he is going to give you some additional information and insight on that.
Great, thanks, Lynn. So one of the ways that the business case originally was started to take shape was in a 2004 article in healthcare called the Fabled Hospital. And it was an attempt at that point in time by the authors to take the innovative design principles that were available at the time and project those into a make-believe hospital setting, with the idea that if we were to take what we know, the best practices that we knew at the time, and move those forward, what benefits could we expect? In 2011, we had the opportunity to go back and revisit that, and that's really the business case of Fabled Hospital 2.0. And in this particular point in time, 7 years later, there was a fair bit more evidence-based design information that was available from the field in terms of implementation. And so what the authors were able to do at this point in time was to go back and actually quantify what it would look like if they were to measure some of the evidence-based design innovations and experience-based innovations that were available to quantify at the time. So taking a 300-bed hospital, projecting that forward, and thinking about costs at about $350,000 associated, $350 million for the build. $26 million of the build in this particular Fabled 2.0 were associated with evidence-based design improvements. And it's important to look at these first costs as part of the evidence-based design process. And then experience-based design implementations were another $3 million. So of the $350 million that they projected forward for the Fabled Hospital, about 10% of them were associated with evidence-based design kinds of principles. In this particular scenario, they were able to hypothesize that that there would be about a 3-year payback. So not only first cost, but also costs downstream, so that the hospital was able to potentially look at how long it would take to recapture those benefits. We'll be able to share this business case with you as well. Next slide, please. As Lynn touched on, the evidence-based design process and the evidence-based design credentialing program, Edac, has been around for a while. The evidence-based design touchstone award was designed to create an opportunity for a real-world demonstration of the evidence-based design process. And this is an award that's presented by the Center for Health Design. And it allows for the capture of practices and lessons learned in the development and design of projects and products. It also allows for the continued growth of the evidence base associated with evidence-based design. And it's an opportunity to share and celebrate the people, vision, projects, and products that advance the knowledge and our ability to quantify the difference that we can make through design and the built environment. One industry quote put it this way: most award programs in healthcare design recognize outstanding facilities design, but this one's different. It recognizes the use of evidence-based design process to increase value, improve outcomes, and engage stakeholders. So it really is that opportunity to move from fable. We think this would happen to demonstrate when we take these kinds of evidence-based design processes, this is the kinds of outcomes we can create. So let's take a look at one of the award winners. So this is the Legacy Healing Garden in Portland, Oregon. I'm actually located in Oregon as well. So this is just downriver from me here along the northern border of the state. And they did a wonderful job of creating an interdisciplinary team and project team. It took multiple years to bring this together, but this is a fabulous example of evidence-based design personified in the built environment. They started out with a great set of teams, and they came up with a very compelling vision. And their vision was, we at Legacy Health have long understood the powerful benefits of sacred green spaces And we've strived to develop healing gardens within our hospitals. At this time, they had 10. This was their 11th, and this was the first one that they were going to rigorously research. While patients and their families and staff who care for them are our utmost priority, we believe that the gardens are for everyone and designed to support the widest range of users. We feel that everyone should have access to the healing power of nature, and will continue to work towards the goal of both within our organization and through evidence-based design, education, and advocacy efforts with our colleagues around the world. So they really looked at this as an opportunity to kind of set the anchor in terms of what they were going to navigate towards, so that true north. Next slide, please. So they went about evaluating particular pieces of evidence that helped support the work that they were getting ready to go through. And this is an important slide. Evidence happens in a variety of different ways. And there's, as you move to the right of this particular slide, they certainly become more reliable and relevant, and more capable of being able to establish hard design decisions around. Next slide, please. So they started out with a series of hypotheses that Lynn pointed to as part of the evidence-based design process. Their first hypothesis was that burnout was a major concern in nursing and is associated with increased turnover, medical errors, post-traumatic stress, and monetary costs. Their second hypothesis was family members of ICU patients experienced acute distress and anxiety and depression. From 30 to 40% of ICU families experience PTSD post-hospitalization. And then their third hypothesis was, we believe the garden would increase satisfaction for the hospital experience for mothers and partners. This was in a family birthing area and an ICU area. So it was a cardiac ICU, so it was a shared space. And what the evidence pointed to in terms of key objectives that they could design around were things like stress reduction by nature access. And you see the types of goals that they put there, views of abundant vegetation, plantings, hallways with windows to be able to take advantage of the garden views. A second piece was stress reduction by social support. So making sure that there were spaces that people could congregate and they were flexible enough to be able to be rearranged if necessary. And then stress reduction by fostering sense of control. And so these were the kinds of things that rigorous studies, back on that last slide, show that a healing garden could address if appropriately designed. So next slide. And we can see some of the things that they pointed to in this particular slide. So you can see multiple access and entry points. So it's easy to get to. You can see the garden corridor on the bottom portion of the slide headed towards the upper right-hand portion of the slide. So you can see that there were lots of opportunities to view and see into the garden space, and just the ability to create control. So there are lots of different spaces for people to be able to choose and self-select in terms of where they want to be. Next slide, please. So they were able to create significant outcomes and measure the impact of their evidence-based design decisions. So a few of the things that they were trying to improve. So they were trying to compare the effect of burnout of taking a daily break of 20 minutes for 6 weeks within the garden, and the effects of an indoor break room versus a garden space. And they were also looking from the family's perspective, what's the immediate change stress levels of a family member from the beginning to the end of a garden visit? And their secondary aim there was to compare the effects of the garden visit on family stress and the effects of spending time in waiting rooms. So they were doing a comparative there. And then the last piece that they were working on was measure the satisfaction of labor experience of mothers and partners following the normal labor and delivery, whether or not they access the garden, and really trying to assess whether or not there was a difference. And you can see in this particular piece, this would tie back to their second question, the effects of the garden visit on ICU family stress. And you can see before in red, the significant changes of after the garden visit in green, and significant impact there. Next slide, please. So there really has been a lot of published information that came out of this particular evidence-based design program. They found that, consistent with the main hypothesis, that 2 key dimensions of nursing burnout were reduced: emotional exhaustion and depersonalization. They also found that taking a single break in the garden reduced anxiety, anger, worry, fatigue, and pain. They also found that the garden substantially outperformed the indoor break rooms in terms of reducing nurse burnout and stress. And then finally, for the family members, they were able to demonstrate that there was significant effect in overall stress for family members. And for postpartum mothers, they found that 75% of the partners participated in the garden. And in addition, 86% of the mothers and 100% of their partner surveyed said that providing access to the garden made a significant difference in their stay. So in summary, this was an opportunity for an organization to pull together a significant group of folks in terms of interdisciplinary team to work on the project. They set great goals based on their research review. They proved out their hypothesis. They were able to collect data, and they've shared that widely. And this is probably one of the most widely published studies related to healing gardens in healthcare. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tiana.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I just wanted to start off by saying, a lot of us can be a little intimidated by evidence-based design, but we all really use it at some level. In a book of visual reference for evidence-based design by Jane Malcolm, she describes 4 levels of evidence-based design. In the level 1, participants stay current on literature in the field and interpret the meaning of evidence as it relates to the project at hand. I think most of us would fall into this category. It's what we do every day. At level 2, hypothesize the expected outcomes of design interventions and plan to subsequently measure the results. I also feel about this that most designers and architects would meet this category. We design, we perform post-occupancy evaluations, and we continue to evolve our designs. And then level 3, measure and publish the results by speaking at conferences and getting articles published. It's taking the step further, and in preparation for this presentation, Jen and I were talking about it and kind of where do we feel we fall within that. And we kind of thought a 2.5. We both had taken and hypothesized on project successes and outcomes. We've spoken at conferences about our projects, but we've not truly done a thorough process of, taking those results and getting them published. And then level 4, all these things, but also getting the research published in the peer review journals. These are the people who truly advance the field. And to me, they are the true heroes of evidence-based design. Next slide. So Jennifer and I were asked to join today's presentation to discuss how we utilize the EBD process in our day-to-day design. We are both interior designers with Orcutt Winslow. I'm in our Nashville office and Jen is in the Phoenix office. We are not researchers, but like most design firms, we also do not have researchers as part of our team. But we both are Edac certified, and we try to use the tools, research, and evidence of the EBD process to support the decisions we make and to help our clients understand the importance and justification of our designs. Also, as healthcare leaders within our design firm, we also use the information to educate our staff and stay up to date on the latest information in the industry. We even have a bi-weekly healthcare education staff meeting where we have an EBD minute that Jen actually leads. Here we also share updates on what the latest happenings are with evidence-based design and remind our staff how to use our affiliate membership with the Center of Health Design to the fullest. With the membership, we have access to the center's knowledge repository and lots of great EBD information. So today we're going to go through a few case studies and review some of the great information provided by the Center of Health Design, the HERD journals, and other sources. So example, if we're going to work on a pediatric project and we want to find what is the latest on pediatric artwork, we can do the research to find out what is the best type of artwork for pediatric patients and the parent experience. I can use this research to justify the dollars for patient, staff, and family satisfaction. So within the Center of Health Design's website, the Knowledge Repository, we can do keyword searches to find what you were looking for. For example, if we did a search on pediatric artwork, here are a few of the examples. In this case study, pediatric art preferences, one size fits all. Based on these findings, the following trends were observed. The combination of bright colors, engaging themes, and natural content is consistently rated high in pediatric art preferences. Realistic nature images with bright colors, water elements, or friendly wildlife may be suitable for pediatric patients. Child art, typically used in pediatric wards, is more suitable for younger children than for older children. And then using animated iconic images may only be good for certain age groups, so you should really be concerned if you choose to use those and use them appropriately. In another study, the pictorial intervention in a pediatric hospital environment, the effects on parental affective perception of the unit. The research for this study showed art was a way to humanize the environment. Art created a positive perception, and art should be used to the maximum extent in a project and to make the most impact. So if we're also working on this project, we might want to also research how the environment and artwork components affect the sensory perception for the staff. So if we do a search for sensory perception, next slide, please. Next slide. So if we do a search for sensory perception, a few articles come up. In this particular study about infusion bays, the article displayed how nearly every sensory aspect of the healthcare environment may affect the overall satisfaction. The study included improvements to room color, personal privacy, the interior decor of the space, and the general home-like or non-hospital-like feel of the space. It suggested that designers might consider working to make certain treatment rooms appear more relaxing with light paint colors and natural elements, such as plants and maybe running water. These same elements could double as private panels like the images we are showing here. Next slide. In another study from the Herd Journal about exploring the relationship between perceived visual access to nature and nurse burnout, 51 nurses working in 6 units and a large medical care unit participated in the study. The study determined the percentage of perceived nature views and organizational stressors were the top best predictors correlating with emotional exhaustion for nurses. The results of these studies also recommended perceiving nature views as an independent or integrated intervention to meditation and relaxing techniques. From a design standpoint, this study suggests that a unit with a break room design with access to nature views could work as a consistent preventative intervention for nurse burnout. Next slide. One other study related to treatment spaces and ceiling artwork. Results determined that ceiling installations could improve overall patient experience, especially in areas where patients are required to lie on their backs for extended periods of time. Any decorative elements intended to provide therapeutic effects could be highly visible to patients and staff. And installations should be appropriate and relative to the size of the environment that they are located. So in summary, all this stuff is, we already know, but the research helps us justify our design. I also guarantee you will learn something new in each study. There are great tools for us as designers to justify the need, the reason, and the expense of our design. So now Jen is going to go into a deeper dive on how she has related some of these studies and types of studies to specific projects. Jen?
Yes, Tiana, thank you. In that same vein as kind of that stuff you already know, art also has an impact on wayfinding. And we know what wayfinding is. If you're in the healthcare field, you know that wayfinding is getting from point A to point B, but how do we use art as part of that? As an example, next slide, Gunnar, We've got a project here for Summit Regional Healthcare, and they are a rural healthcare provider here in the great state of Arizona. And yes, we do have skiing and snow and mountains in Arizona too. And their demographic up in that northern section of our state is actually more of a senior citizen, elderly kind of demographic. And as I was doing some of the research, one of the center's studies that came up was this particular one about simulated physical aging and how that affects our wayfinding. Now, this client is wanted to adopt the on-stage, off-stage clinic environment, and how does wayfinding through that space, how is that affected through the aging process of our demographics? So I was really looking for information to deal with these artwork panels and how we were going to provide the imagery and the colors on that particular one. However, what I really wanted to pull everyone's attention to from the knowledge repository when you type in wayfinding is that the knowledge repository has about 100 citations for wayfinding. Now, if you go on Google Scholar or PubMed and type in the same thing, you may get well over thousands and thousands and thousands of citations. But what they don't have is what the center has, and that's the key point summary. So if you click on that key point summary, you go to the next slide, Gunnar, please. The key point summary really does, it's kind of like a cliff notes for evidence-based design and this particular study. And then that's what I love about utilizing this tool. And then if you click on that purple bar right there, then you get the PDF of that summary, and you can send that to your client. You can, it takes the work out of really doing all of the research of trying to get into the evidence. This particular study was at an acute care hospital and not a medical office building or clinic environment. It did assist me in thinking about how difficult it is to navigate through the system, but it also utilized younger participants in gerontologic suits. So we knew that it was going to, well, we didn't know, but it came up with that was part of the limitations. But nothing in that study talked about color and iconography too for those panels. But it did help me in talking about the hallway lengths in this very long medical office building, and also talking about utilizing these pause spaces for people to pause if they're going a long length, to pause and sit and rest for a bit and then restart their journey to their exam room. So then, since it didn't perfectly fit in with what I needed, I went back to my bookmarked session on the knowledge repository and found this one, Wayfinding in an Unfamiliar Environment. And that one did talk about the utilizing the colors and as landmarks to help somebody go through the space. So that key point summary, I didn't have to download the entire PDF and go through all of the study. And so that was really, really good for me as a design professional. So our final utilization, next slide, Gunnar, was to have whole bunch of different colors. There were, I think, 15 different corridors, 15 different icons. And I went back just to my design training in school, back to talking about contrast with wall colors, the contrast of the icon. We also made sure that it was demographically significant to the population up in the White Mountains of Arizona. We have a very large Native American population there, and there were certain icons that they did not want us to use as well. So even though the research that I culled was not absolutely perfectly aligned with my project, it still helped me. And then the next portion, another thing that I'm really extremely personally invested in is behavioral health. Next slide, Gunnar. the same client up in Northern Arizona, and they wanted to do a geriatric behavioral health unit inside the hospital. Now, thinking back to when this project came across my desk, I remembered back to another webinar that I was on. So it's not just the knowledge repository at the center's website, it's also being able to go back and rewatch other webinars. I remember one webinar talking about a behavioral health unit and pulling the nurse station out into the corridor. And that really helps with line of sight down both corridors, down to both of those entrances and the sally ports to this unit. So that particular study, or that seed that was planted years ago from a webinar, I could go back and reference back to, and I still kept that 8-foot clear corridor around it, but it really helped the staff with that line of sight. The next project is also a behavioral health unit. And this one, I came on board at Orcutt Winslow right when this project was almost done with construction. It's a brand new facility, and there were no formal EBD goals that were inside the project. I knew almost nothing about this project when asked to do a post-occupancy evaluation. But that being said, I think that EBD is still important at that point. That was at the very end point of Lynn's 8-step process. So there is a few things about post-occupancy evaluations on the center's website too. And this particular study, it helped me with things that I needed to do for the post-occupancy evaluation. The center also has a post-occupancy evaluation toolkit. And even though it's for clinics, I also downloaded that, and that assisted me in going through this particular project. If you if you're a part of the affiliate or the Affiliate Plus membership of the center's website, you can also, next slide, Gunnar, you can also download the results and the actual projects and the studies from the HERD journal. That's a really great benefit to everyone in this industry. That's what I love about this industry, being able to present and share information like this. One of the design innovations that I felt was pretty important in that last picture was that centralized nurse station was open, and we have some very big discussions about open nurse stations in behavioral health. And so this particular study talked about those open communication centers, which are really your nurse stations, elicited more mixed evaluations. And that was one of the design innovations to this project. So it helped me with some of the staff interviews and the questions that I asked of the staff when we were doing our post-occupancy evaluation. And then really finally, I'd like to reiterate what EBD really is and what it isn't. I think that a lot of people believe that EBD is like the next ADA. It's the next code that we have to enforce or something, or if we've used EBD to inform our design, that our design is infallible. It's not a blanket prescription for every single project. I think back to when healthcare and hospitals were large wards of many, many patients. And then we found evidence and we worked our way back to, smaller rooms, 4 people in one room. Now then there's 2. And now when we build new, we have to build with single patient rooms. Well, is a single patient room, that's what we think is perfectly great for, we're even doing it in NICUs now. Is the single patient room actually beneficial to everyone? And I think back to behavioral health, and I think back to a child who might be going into an inpatient behavioral health and they're from a large family and they've never been alone. And is a single patient room the best for that population too? It's using the evidence, diving in 2 feet into all the evidence and seeing what's out there, continually sharing and continually doing webinars and the studies, And you don't have to have a PhD or you don't have to have a research arm of your firm in order to be part of evidence-based design. Lynn?
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's so much fun to hear from, Jennifer and Tiana have known us at the center for quite some time, and we've partnered together. And so it's really fun to see how you are able to utilize and bring the resources alive. And, our goal at the center is really to help you do that. And so we've worked closely together. I always say that we really do partner with the industry. We can provide and make it easier for you to access and find the information and the resources and some of the thought leadership. But the evidence is always evolving, and you're bringing that to life in your projects every day. So it's such an honor to work with both of you, and thank you for sharing those awesome examples. So going back to some of the resources, Jen and Tiana, I don't know if you've ever utilized the EBD Journal Club, but our most recent EBD Journal Club was a presentation from Fabled to Reality at Fabled Hospital. And this is actually a recording that is available free of charge to everybody on the call today. You also have free access to the Knowledge Repository, which is that tool that Jennifer was talking about that makes it much easier to find relevant research that's been vetted by the Center for Health Design's research team. Randy, do you have anything to add about the Journal Club?
No, I think it's a great resource. And one of the things that I would say is that the Parkland example takes a subset of the Fable ideas and measures them in real world. And so it was fabulous. It's a fabulous program.
So all you have to do is create a login and search for this, and you will find it under the recorded events. If you go to the events calendar. If you have questions, can't find it, you can always email us. Next slide. This is just giving you sort of that, quick overview of the Knowledge Repository tool. We have many industry partners that sponsor this tool. They're listed at the bottom of the screen, and then that helps to make those wonderful resources available free of charge to everyone in the industry. And as Jennifer was pointing out, these are resources and those key point summaries are things you can download and share with your clients and your peers as well. Next slide. And so we all have an opportunity, and hopefully you feel more comfortable now, and that the Center for Health Design and Evidence-Based Design, we're really all about collaboration, working together, bringing all of the stakeholders together to push the industry forward. So the other thing is, we know, and we've probably all experienced this, that too often the building is not really considered to be a strategic part of the project, a strategic part in improving outcomes for patient care, for staff, and for family and visitors. But we all know that it's so much a part of that. And so our goal is to help you do that. And the evidence-based design process gives you a framework that really helps you to be part of that conversation. Randy, any other closing thoughts?
And the only thing I would add to that is that evidence-based design matches up really nice with evidence-based medicine if you're working in the healthcare space, and evidence-based design in education and other spaces as well. So there's a larger body of knowledge, and there's a certain nomenclature, a certain language that's associated with evidence-based work. And so becoming more fluent in that will do nothing but help you. It also creates an opportunity to have conversations beyond just the initial sunk costs or the first costs, to really look at investment in projects and pieces of projects specific to what you do over time, to be able to see the payback and to understand that that's an important part of the process.
So call to action. Go ahead and give it a try. Go on the center's website, learn a little bit more about evidence-based design, check out the Knowledge Repository, and know that all of us here on the webinar today including OLE. We're all available as a resource. And I think that's the other exciting thing about evidence-based design is it really becomes a community effort, and we're all constantly learning from one another. And so Jennifer and Tiana, do you have any additional closing comments?
In talking about that, Lynn, it is a community that is very inclusive, and I feel like I've met my tribe. People talk about finding your tribe. The people that attend the Healthcare Design Expo and Conference every November, the people that are on this webinar, you all are my tribe. So I just am very grateful for the center too, as an advocate for us as A&D professionals too. So those are my closing thoughts.
Thank you.
You're a great partner to the industry in general. So I think that's a really important part.
Thank you. Well, I guess at this point we could turn it over to Gunnar or Jennifer or Karen to take questions if any of the attendees have questions for us.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. So one of the questions that came through on the registration was some quick ways to incorporate evidence-based design. Do you have any quick methods that you use?
Well, I always like to caution. Quick is scary to me because it's not a silver bullet, and as Jennifer was saying, it's not infallible. But if you're really just looking to dip your toe in the water and become familiar, I think the knowledge repository is a really nice starting point. And that is available free of charge to the entire industry. So I guess I would encourage folks to start there.
Yeah, that's how you can get your feet wet with it and start researching something specific. Start with something small. It's not something too big. And just get your feet wet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I love the idea of the potential toe in the water, going to research and printing things off and sharing it with other folks who are part of your team to expand your universe of people who are supportive of and understand the importance of research and and evidence in the process of design. So you can do that at the knowledge repository. There, it's all printable.
Yeah.
Jennifer, we do have a question that came up in the Q&A, and that is, are there any specific materials or finishes that EBD encourages designers to use? And also, are there any materials that they should stay away from?
Yes, materiality. Such an important subject. Materiality, I always think immediately of flooring and slip and fall resistance, and nothing that's too shiny, but we still want shiny because we still want to be perceived as somebody that's very cleanly. There's plenty of information on the knowledge repository about different types of flooring and what kind of flooring would be preferential to your actual installation. I would urge you just to go there and type in, healthcare flooring or something like that, and start your research right away.
I also think we'll see a lot come out from COVID research with materiality related to COVID. I think we're so new in the middle of it right now, but I think in the future, we're going to have a lot more evidence to support what we're doing for that.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, to that end, Tiana, I don't know if you've tried this yet, or Jennifer, but there has been just an incredible influx of amazing research studies that have been added to the knowledge repository. And all you have to do is enter COVID, and you'll be up to date on everything and it continues to be added. But certainly, we've learned a lot, and we still have much to learn.
We'd had just two resources that come to mind to build off the flooring. We had two surfaces webinars or webinars associated with surfaces. One was in July of 2019, and the other one was in 2020, about the same time. Both of those webinars talk about infection prevention and infection control and durability associated with with fabrics and various surfaces within the healthcare environment. And a lot of times what surfaces are used in healthcare environments, a lot of times are the same kinds of fabrics and surfaces that are used in other places as well.
And that's a good point, and it emphasizes why and how, choosing materials for cleanability and durability is very important in healthcare and beyond right now. We're seeing that in every industry because post-COVID, we all recognize the importance of that, which makes my heart sing because, we've all known as people in healthcare that of course that's important in other environments. But now at a consumer level, people recognize that and are demanding it. So I think that's a real positive silver lining from the pandemic.
Especially related to education and senior living. I see a lot of the cross-referencing there with this evidence.
We're also seeing crossover to workplace, right, as well. So, I mean, one of the interesting things about COVID was that there was an immediate pivot towards healthcare to say, what are you guys doing? And all the other verticals. And so we saw a lot of activity that way.
Great point. We have another question here from someone that says, what would you say is the most tedious part of the EBD process?
So most non-researchers would say research, but researchers would say that's the best part. So it all depends. It all depends.
Yeah, you're asking two designers, and sometimes those studies, when you're reading them and they get into all of the the data and how they got the data and all the different graphs and charts, and it almost feels like an algebra question. Sometimes I get into the okay, I'm ready, okay, we're doing this again. For me, that's the tedious part, but it's also important.
Yeah.
I'm actually an ex-healthcare administrator, so I'm going to take it from a slightly different angle, which is sometimes it's the battles of having to battle for pieces of a project that you think are critically important to the overall value of the project that's going to be delivered. And the tedious process sometimes is developing the necessary ramp and runway of information to be able to sustain elements of a project that you think are important through the use of evidence and research to get past the barriers that, we're 10% or 20% over budget, immediately value engineer that out of the process instead of stepping back and taking a more analytic approach, using the research to build a return on investment over time that allows us to see our way to VE means VE over 3 years versus VE means over the next 3 weeks.
Completely agree. Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's a question for Jen about your project that you shared with us. When using color for wayfinding, did you have a conversation about how a person who is colorblind would be able to also navigate through the space on their own?
Oh boy, did we ever. And that's the integrated project delivered to with the team. We know that some people are color weak and that we know some people are color blind. And so the icons, we had the icons that all had the circles and then the squirrel in it or whatever the case is. All of those also had to make sure that contrast with the artwork behind it, you could key into that's a squirrel. And I know I've got squirrel on my paper, so I'm going to go to squirrel to go down the squirrel, the squirrel hallway to find my exam room. So it didn't just rely on color for sure. It also didn't just, the original design, Randy, as we talk about BE, the original design was actually a lit soffit, so an integrally lit soffit with all of these colors matching. Well, that quickly got VE to a gyp soffit painted with a light fixture installed on it. But even using light as a wayfinding element, other monuments, I always think of the obelisk when you go to Europe and you look for the obelisk to do the roundabout. Nope, I've been there before, I know where I'm going. That same concept utilized in the clinic or the hospital environment is really important.
Yeah, makes sense. We've had a number of people ask if we would share the slides. So if everybody will agree to that, we can have Gunnar send those out after this webinar. And we are recording this. Somebody asked that question. So we will be able to send that out. And there was a question about CEUs. And this webinar is worth 1 CEU for Edac certification. And are there other opportunities, Lynn and Randy, for CEUs on, that you guys can share with our audience?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Randy.
Go ahead then. Yeah, I mean, the website is packed with CEU opportunities, some of which are pay access, but a lot of them are just open access pieces that, folks like Wooly and others within the industry have created an opportunity through sponsorship of a particular program, but there's a lot of material that's available. So we just check out the center's website. And as was mentioned earlier, I don't think you do a webinar like this without the idea that you're going to be an open resource for everybody who attended afterwards. So if there's anything we can do to help, we're glad to do that.
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to keep the Q&A open for anybody who wants to stay on, but if you need to jump off, we understand. We've put everyone's contact information in the chat, so if you'd like to reach out to one of our panelists after the call, you can do that. We're going to send you an email with the webinar, the link to the recording, as well as the information on the accreditation after in the next day or two. So we're just really thankful that you all joined us. I know I myself am really excited to jump into the knowledge repository and do a little search and get information for upcoming projects. So thank you so much. And we look forward to working with all of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Stay on for a little bit longer.
No additional questions in the queue at this point.
Thank
I
you
cannot
all.
See any.
Thank
you,
you.
panelists, for doing a
Alright.
great job. Really
Thank
nice.
you, Olin.
You.
Great
Take care,
job.
everyone.
Yeah. Bye, Jen.
All right.